with community development. You want your growth to be managed so that you can accommodate growth as your community is able to take on some more capacity and more load for the capacity that it has. And so these two topics go hand in hand together. As I do with all of my classes, I like to start with just letting you know that there are particular Wyoming statutes that apply here. In one of the earlier classes, we talked about the core authority that you have as a municipality coming in a form that we call home rule. And that home rule is authority given to you by the Wyoming Constitution to run your municipality as you see fit. One of the key exceptions to that is whenever the state has passed a statute that applies to all municipalities, it applies to everybody equally. When the state has done that, this chips away at your home rule authority and requires that everybody do these certain things in the same way. And some of the things that I'm referring to here are included in Title 15 of the Wyoming state statutes, and they have to do with annexation to your municipality, planning within it, and in particular zoning. And so those three things in particular are areas where the state has passed statutes, and so your home rule doesn't apply. You must follow the state statutes here. And so we're going to jump into those a little bit more, but I do want you to know that you do have to follow state law here. This isn't something that you get to just dismiss. Additionally, when we talk about things like community development and economic development, we're talking about planning, thinking ahead about what your community growth is going to look like, or if it's going to grow at all. And so I want you to also recall as we jump into this that these development concepts really require a good plan. And so we've talked previously about the planning process, but here more than ever, you want to make sure that you are listening to what your community really wants, to establish goals and a vision for your community that really depends upon your success and the public success and their input. And so this is where the rubber really meets the road, and the planning process results in a plan that then dictates how you're going to go about doing your job, and analyzing whether or not you've gotten things better or whether you got them mucked up, how you implemented your plan. All of those concepts have to play here with this topic of community development, and you really see it play out from the vision all the way down to the bricks and mortar or whatever you pave your streets with. One of those state statutes that I referred to requires all municipalities to have a master plan. And the wording of that statute is especially important for those of you that are running a municipality, because it's got a couple of odd things you need to know about. First of all, prior to the date of this statute passing, just about nobody out there in the municipal world had a master plan. This Wyoming law was passed, I think, in 1977, and so if you go back and look, just about every municipality, all 99 of them in the late 70s, quickly adopted a master plan, and many of them haven't gone back to look at it since then. But you should, because this really is the key to making your community succeed. And so go back to look to see what your master plan looks like. The statute itself, the other interesting thing about it is that it identifies the Planning Commission as the organization that adopts the master plan. In fact, they're the ones that develop it and adopt it. This is a unique feature of Wyoming municipal law, where the Planning Commission itself is the one that actually develops the community development master plan. It's going to be subsequently presented to the elected leaders of the community, the city council, for their adoption, but they don't get to write it. The Planning Commission itself does this. This is one of their very important roles in this area. And so the master plan, according to the state statute, needs to address the general character and location of your transportation routes. Not just streets, but biking paths and those sorts of things. You need to address both public and private utilities. You need to describe, how your community has developed thus far and what your plans are for future development. And that's where things like a land use map or even a zoning ordinance and a zoning plan come into play. You don't have to zone your community, but you do have to have a master plan to know where and how your community has developed so far and in what kinds of ways, and then know what your capacity is to be able to grow in new directions. That's really all this master plan is that all of us are required to have. You might have one actually under a different name. It might be called a land use plan or a comprehensive plan, or some people throw all of those letters and words into their title and call it a comprehensive master use land plan. It doesn't matter. A master plan talks about your community's vision for where you want to be in the future. It identifies opportunities on how to get there and some specific goals and actions that you can get there with. It starts with identifying, here's what our community looks like today. Here's an inventory of its current status. And given this vision that we have, here are the things that we want to accomplish in order to get there. These kinds of plans are very valuable for other people that are making an investment in your community, maybe by developing a new business, or maybe you've got a new subdivision going in, a new housing developer wants to take a look at where your community is going. A well-planned community is attractive to businesses and to others that simply want to invest money in their local community. And so this master plan can take a lot of different forms. I'm showing here the table of contents from an older Casper plan. I don't even know if they still have this one in place, but they started out by talking about, here's our story, here's who we are, here's how we live in Casper, Wyoming, and what our vision is for its future, and how we plan to get there in terms of transportation and development in the future. And here's our path forward, and identifies what the priorities are for the community. Done correctly, these kind of plans are great for evaluating, elected leaders' performance while they were in office. They're great to get the community and your leaders to go out and talk about what they really, really do want to happen in the community. And again, done right and kept current, they can be very helpful to attract more investment in your community. And so I think it's very important for those reasons alone to get going with a current master plan. Again, done right, this will be a plan for your future, and so think of it like a roadmap. It helps to provide some guidance for developers as they're thinking about where they want to develop, and maybe you've got for example, a large landowner just outside of your community who's already made it very clear, I'm never developing my property. You can just scratch it off the list for the next 20 years. You can grow in a different direction for all I care. If he's got you landlocked, then you need to recognize that that's the case. And so talking to the folks out there and listening to what they want for their property and for their neighborhoods is important. And this is one of those documents that brings those conversations to light. It anticipates what's going on in the future, and it lets people know, here's how we make decisions together about what our community is going to be looking like. And so we really do want you to develop a comprehensive master plan that anyone could use. Even, the entrepreneur in their community that wants to start a new coffee shop, they need to know where the growth areas are, what your anticipating in terms of investment. Families want to know, how are you taking care of your community parks? Are you going to continue to invest in them? Are they going to be safe communities for our families and for our kids? So these things can really take in an awful lot of information and provide a lot of guidance for other kinds of plans, not just community and economic development, but your capital improvement plans would be reflected in this. A lot of times, for example, when CBI does these comprehensive plans, we'll partner up with engineers that will tie in a lot of the roads, water, bridge, wastewater systems into that plan so that we know exactly what the capacities are and where investments need to be made down the road. The other thing that I want to point out to you as a municipal leader is that this is one of the areas where you have some authority and you should be thinking beyond your current city limits. When you're anticipating the future for your community, most of our communities are growing slowly but in a planned fashion. One of the things that you can do as a municipality is make plans for the area that is immediately adjacent to your municipal boundaries. It used to be you could look a half mile out, now you can look a mile out. And in fact, if anyone proposes a subdivision up to a mile outside of your city boundaries, you have the rights, extraterritorial rights, to say yes or no to that subdivision. You can deny it from proceeding if it doesn't line up well with something that you want to do. And for example, one of the things that many municipalities look at, as we did here when we did this in Saratoga, was as you can see, the black lines indicate a lot of the lot development and the boundaries of the community. The tan area here is the half-mile buffer, and the green area is the existing mile buffer. When we started to look at things a mile out, we recognized that this Mountain View Estates, a subdivision that is northeast of Saratoga, is something that we do want to pay attention to make sure that in the future our roads line up, to make sure that if there is an interconnect with the water system out there, that we've done it in the most efficient place possible. And so you want to look beyond your boundaries to think about how your community might be growing, not just the municipality, but the broader community, and be working with your county commissioners, or in some cases, special districts that might have some authority out there, or big landowners. For example, Old Baldy is a golf club that you see here in the southeast part of this map. A major landowner that you want to be talking to whenever you're making plans to be developing in their area. And so one of the first things you do is you define the area that you want to study, and then create a map of what's currently going on right there. That's what we mean when we talk about a land use map. It's not zoning at this level. All we're really talking about is what's going on with the land currently. And is that something that we want to encourage in the future, or do we even care? How would it map out? Some of the early concepts of zoning included, separating industrial areas from residential areas. And that might still be a good idea, but many would argue that at this level, we just need to look at how things actually are. And so by developing a land use map, for example, in Saratoga, this was the next step that we took. You can see here the half mile and the 1 mile cloud around the city limits that we've drawn in. But beyond that, we just wanted to start to identify how is this land currently being used. And as you can see, most of it's being used residentially. We've got some commercial development, and that exists along the state highway that cuts north-south through town. There's some other commercial development on the west side of town. And then we've got a lot of open space and a little bit of industrial uses around Saratoga. This is not a zoning map. It's just a way to inventory the current uses of this map. And so you start with that, identifying with what you have. If you do want to move towards zoning, as Saratoga has, you can then use that land use map and, consistent with it, come up with a zoning map. And I want to point out a couple of things that, for example, Saratoga has done. They've been very creative with their process. They still have a very large area that's residential, and it is all zoned as single-family residential. But within that, different neighborhoods they've recognized have different levels of density. And so they've come up with different districts, residential districts, within that single-family use that recognizes we're looking for larger lots or smaller lots in this particular area. Likewise, if you look at that area that was all previously one color under commercial uses for Saratoga, that north-south area along the highway, what the town did is they decided, when we zone this, we're going to split that commercial zone up into a couple of different things and recognize that much of our downtown area is really just retail. And there's a different kind of business. For example, hotels and gas stations that we would consider to be hotel businesses in the other parts of our commercial district. And likewise, they've split their industrial district into a heavy industrial and a light industrial district. Those are the kinds of things that you can do within a zoning ordinance, and they can be shown on a map like this. You can develop and adopt a zoning map as long as it's consistent with your existing land use map. You can do that. So some of the other things that are included in a master plan include a lot of what I would call the public infrastructure in your community. It is the streets, the roads, the parks, the playgrounds, even the bicycle pathways, your public buildings, your public property, even if it's a vacant public lot or a vacant lot that's never been developed at all. Make sure that you know where those things are and map them out. You're required to do that by the statute. Additionally, you want to include both public and private utilities. And what I mean by that is, to the extent that you can get phone carrier information, telecommunications information, where your fiber is, add that alongside of your water and your wastewater systems and natural gas, if you're one of those communities that has natural gas. Map that stuff all out so that you can see exactly where it is. And then you'll start to identify from that really where there are some natural corridors and identify some natural traffic flows. And if you're starting to see with some problems, maybe you do have residential mixed with industrial, mixed with commercial, and you're thinking, we should be moving away from that kind of mixed use toward a more consistent zoning use, then go ahead and zone it, label those non-conforming buildings what they are, non-conforming uses, and hope for change in the long run. Your master plan should also include things like community centers and where your neighborhoods get together. You should also be clear-eyed about this and recognize that there are areas, maybe on the other side of the railroad tracks, that are blighted, and you want to address that blight. Zoning doesn't have to be addressed in the master plan, but if you want to zone your community, then it needs to be initially addressed here in that master plan. And I want you to recognize a couple things about this. Yes, people get downright hostile when you literally just use the word zoning. Nonetheless, recognize this is stuff that's been around for 100 years. And what we're talking about are regulations that are designed to protect public health, public safety, and welfare. It protects property values, and that's why you're looking at regulating the use of the land. And the primary way that zoning does that is by controlling the size, the height, and the location of the buildings that get put on these lots. Early on, when zoning was developed, it started in, frankly, East Coast communities that were large, and they had some problem areas where residential development occurred right next to industrial uses. And so some of the earliest goals of zoning were simply to separate what otherwise would be incompatible uses. Today, we're a bit more sophisticated about it. Modern zoning goals include things like focusing on primary versus feeder routes. We're focused more on how people get around to and from school or to and from work. We have bus-friendly routes. We have pedestrian-friendly routes. We're also increasingly interested in the preservation of our historic neighborhoods, whether they're downtown commercial or even historic residential neighborhoods. Historic preservation has taken on a much bigger role with regard to zoning. And as I said earlier, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled, I think in 1925 or 26 in the Euclid case, that this stuff is constitutional. It's been ruled constitutional consistently now for almost 100 years. And so understand that zoning has been found to be constitutional because it circles back to that constitutional use, protecting the general health and public welfare and safety. So, what do you put in a zoning code if you do have a zoning code? I'll tell you that the way that Wyoming's laws are set up, that zoning codes typically take an approach about the uses that are allowed on any particular piece of property. And there's one of three directions that you can take with any particular zone. You can have certain uses that are allowed as a matter of right. In other words, they're literally included in a list of uses that are allowed in that particular zone. Single family residential use is allowed, for example, in almost any district, any zone. Others will allow you to do that if you meet certain conditions. So a second type of use that is allowed in a zoning district would be those that are allowed conditionally. If you meet these certain conditions, limit the amount of traffic coming to and from your CPA office that's being operated out of your home, or whatever those qualifying conditions might be, then we will allow that use to happen in that particular zone. And then thirdly, there are prohibited uses. These are things that are not going to be allowed under any circumstance. For example, when I had control of the business park in Douglas, as a new development there, it needed to be zoned. And the city asked me, what zone do you guys want for this business park? Well, we didn't want to do a planned unit development because we wanted to be flexible. We didn't know what businesses might be coming in, but we did have an idea of what we wanted to create there, and we knew of a couple of clients that we could count on. One was an airplane manufacturer, the other was a community college, and soon after that, a USDA office. So based on our early thoughts, we thought, this is going to be kind of a mixed educational, commercial, light industrial development. We do not want a porn shop here. We do not want, adult entertainment here. And so we asked the folks at City Hall to not give us that heavy industrial designation because we didn't want to have to include a strip club in our business park. We wanted it to stay focused on education and commercial uses. And so we wanted to be in a zone where that would be prohibited. It wouldn't be something that would happen as a matter of right or under any conditions. As I said, your zoning ordinance can address basically what your buildings look like, how big they are, and where they get located. What we're talking about here is the bulk, the size of the building, how many stories it can be tall, how many feet it can be tall, how far back it goes from the front property line, what kind of development standards you might have. In Douglas, for example, Bobby and I worked on a set of development standards when Walmart was looking to open there because we didn't think it was a strong market for Walmart. We thought they would open and then close, and we didn't want this gargantuan store and gargantuan parking lot in Douglas empty. And so we we didn't zone Walmart out of existence, but what we did do was require that they put in a parking lot like you see in the picture here, where there are islands with plants in them. It's not just a huge, 20 acres of pavement, but it's broken up with trees and bushes, and we established light standards. And what that did is it made it very clear to Walmart that if you come in and you build a 100,000 square foot facility, this is going to be how many parking spaces you're going to need, and this is what your parking lot's going to need to look like. Your building is not going to be allowed to have high pile storage unless you put in this kind of system. You are going to have to abide just like everybody else according to our sign standards and our environmental standards, especially with regard to surface water drainage. Those are the things that got put into that zoning regulation so that we could then control what actually happens there. Along with zoning regulations, many of you also have passed what I'll call an overlay district. This might be a downtown development district, an urban design overlay district, a historic overlay district, or some other kind of overlay. These are allowed when you have a zoning code. I can remember, for example, when the city of Cheyenne was talked to about an airport compatible use overlay. They wanted to make sure that in Cheyenne, incoming flights were not so close to the residential developments that used to be there, and now we've got a park developed there. So these kinds of additional restrictions can be overlaid, and you can actually be subject to several different layers of regulation and zoning. This is one of the things that businesses find so incomprehensible and unbearable. The reality is, if you want to protect the historic preservation principles that your community supports, then you might need to create these kind of overlay districts. And a zoning code is what gives them the teeth to be enforced. A lot of times when we break it down district by district, this is the kind of thing that we're talking about with a zoning code. It defines your building envelope, how tall it can be, how close it can or must be to the front yard. Sometimes you have a certain number of feet that buildings need to be set back from the boundary line. In other districts, maybe, for example, if you're trying to do some historic preservation downtown, you want those downtown buildings built all the way out to the property line, just like they've always done that historically downtown, so that when you look down the street, they all line up, and there's no gaps between the buildings. They all support one another as you look down the street. And so these are the kind of things that you include in your zoning ordinance so that you can control how that property gets used and what those structures actually look like. The authority to zone your property comes not just from Wyoming statutes. I'll remind all of you that this is written right into our federal constitution, that the power really rests in we the people to promote the general welfare, to promote the health and safety of our local citizens. This is something that was not delegated to the federal government. It is specifically set aside for state and local governments. And here in Wyoming, that the authority to do these things has been pushed directly to municipalities from the state based on state statute, but to make sure that everybody has the right to be able to get their community managed in a way that works for them. So, if you have adopted any kind of a zoning ordinance and you want to make a change to it, or somebody wants to pursue a conditional use development, then you need to have a public hearing about that. In fact, public hearings are required whenever someone is asking for an exception to a zoning ordinance, or whenever they are asking for a conditional use permit, Or if your development code just simply says, if anything gets developed on this property, you go through a public hearing process so that we can make sure that the public knows how you're addressing each of these conditions. Each of our concerns need to be addressed. And so public hearings are a big part of zoning, and they're not good or bad per se. They are what you make of them. Well done with good notice and a good structure, you can gather an awful lot of good public input and change plans on the fly rather than just have folks give a yes or no, thumbs up, thumbs down kind of opinion. The way that the state statute is written is that if you do have a development where you've got to have a public hearing and a public process to get a governing body to approve it, then if 20% or more of the adjacent landowners, or however you've defined it in your zone ordinance, by statute, it's 20% of those that live within 140 feet of the area proposed for a change. If 20% of those folks object, then when it comes up for approval, it takes a supermajority, a 3/4 vote of your governing body, in order to approve that particular process or that particular change or exception from the zoning code. So it's a big deal. Once you've approved and adopted these zoning codes, they don't change easily. All right, once you have them in place, also, you have authority as a municipality to enforce these things. You can enforce your zoning ordinance with cease and desist orders, and that includes even if you have adopted building codes that apply in your community. Cease and desist is a very powerful, legally binding demand that you can serve on a property owner and require that they stop doing what they're doing until you've had an opportunity to review and approve it. You also, by having this in place, have a system that can back up your ability to enforce actions. And that comes through what many of you have heard of as the certificate of occupancy. The way that the law is set up is that you have authority over the use of buildings within your municipality. And so before any landowner or occupant can start using that facility, they must have a certificate of occupancy from you, the municipality. And you forever have the right and authority to revoke that certificate of occupancy if they're breaking the rules. If they have, for example, engaged in some use that is specifically not allowed according to your zoning ordinance, then you can go in and say, stop, you must stop this. And we can require that you completely vacate these processes. We'll pull your certificate of occupancy for any use if you don't immediately stop this. You have the authority, in other words, to take any appropriate action to address violations of your zoning code or any of your other city ordinances. You have some teeth. You can use those here. If you use them with regard to the zoning ordinance, or someone has made a decision, maybe you've got a building official that's made a decision as to whether or not something's going to be allowed according to the zoning ordinance, then the property owner can appeal that decision. They can appeal it to the Board of Adjustment, which typically is your planning commission, the second important thing that your planning commission does. Or in some cases, they can appeal to a district court. They do not get to appeal the zoning ordinance itself. They don't get to come to the city council and say, you need to undo this. You don't have the right to do this. The fact is, the way the statute set this up, they put this power into the hands of the planning commission with the hope that people that understand planning concepts and that were involved in the development of the plan are the ones that are making decisions as to how it gets implemented. And if a building official violates that in some way, then they do need to be the ones that the property owner comes back to say, wait a minute, I interpret your master plan and your zoning ordinance to be this. And your Board of Adjustment has the authority to overrule city officials and say, yes, this is exactly how it needs to be done. And if they've got concerns about due process or some other concern here, they can then appeal that to a local district court. But there's a lot of teeth here that you have, a lot of enforcement authority that you have. Some red flags to watch out for in the zoning topic, besides recognizing that this is a political hot button. I will tell you that if you're using your zoning code inappropriately, there are lots of examples in the law books of zoning ordinances being attacked because they were used inappropriately. When you develop a zone, for example, you want to make sure it's a zone, that you're not singling out specific property owners or specific businesses or even certain kinds of industries. When you talk about a sign ordinance, you have to recall that we've got freedom of speech in this country, and First Amendment rights overrule any kind of ordinance that you might have over the content of what gets actually said in that ordinance. You can control whether it's got lights or how bright those lights are, or maybe even the hours of operation, but you don't get to control the content that's on that sign. You also cannot engage in exclusionary zoning. That's what happens when you exclude an entire industry. For example, the pornography industry. It cannot be zoned completely out of existence in any community. And so that kind of exclusionary zoning violates, again, freedom of speech rights. Your zoning, while you've got one right to oppose subdivisions outside of your city limits, that's it. Other than that, you have no extraterritorial jurisdiction. So if you're trying to pass a zoning ordinance that tells that new subdivision in the county how to do things, that's not going to be effective. Spot zoning, making exceptions to the rules because someone's got political influence can be disastrous. Taking, this is a concept that most of you are familiar with. If the government takes away your property to put in a new road or to build a new airport, they've got to pay you for taking that property. Sometimes zoning ordinances have also been found to take value away from the property owner because they're so restrictive. And so you want to make sure that you're getting good legal counsel on whatever your zoning ordinance is, and also how you enforce it, because these are legitimate issues that we've seen be brought to court over and over again. Non-conforming uses are very common, but they're still non-conforming. And basically what a non-conforming use is someone's making use of property that's been zoned a particular way, but their use isn't consistent. It doesn't conform to that use. We saw this, for example, in Douglas, where there once were little islands of county property through the town. Those once may have been county zoned or county property that was not zoned, but once they came into the city and got zoned, if there was a horse corral there when the property came into the city, it was probably going to be zoned as residential property, but because that horse corral had been there for the last 100 years or whatever it was, as long as it stood, as long as it didn't need to be replaced completely, they would be allowed to continue that non-conforming use. And so there are lots of red flags out there to be aware of. Another area that I would want you to be concerned about here are with private covenants. You're going to have property owners come to you and ask you as a municipal leader to enforce their covenants, and you do not have the authority to do that. Covenants, restrictive covenants, and there are a few other names that they're known by, are essentially private restrictions that flow with the ownership of the property. They're not public laws. They're essentially deed restrictions that were recorded against private property and can only be enforced by those private property owners, not by you. Uh, so private covenants are a way to get some of these same things done on private property outside of municipally incorporated properties, but they are very different and they have no effect on one another whatsoever. You can't enforce restrictive covenants, and they can't be used to change what your zoning laws actually say. So there is a difference between them. I want to point out a couple of other things that we've noticed over the decades that we've been involved in this, and that is that we have changed how we go about zoning. Where originally the plan was, let's keep residential districts separated from industrial districts, we've started to shift that some. And in modern zoning discussions, what we oftentimes hear are discussions about one of these different concepts: mixed use or form-based or unified land development codes. These are all different ways to think about the purpose of what you're trying to accomplish with zoning. For example, with the mixed use development, oftentimes what we're looking at is that we don't have to completely separate all residential from all commercial businesses. In fact, some people find it kind of helpful to be able to walk up to the grocery store or even walk to their own office. And increasingly then we're seeing people that want to be in a neighborhood like that, where they can live and work and shop in one neighborhood. That would be a mixed use development. Others have looked not so much at what's going on in the buildings, but just try to make sure that the buildings themselves are consistent and compatible with one another. That might be form-based zoning regulations. Likewise, unified land development codes, we're looking at making sure that the land is developed in a way that it can be used for any of those purposes. Some differences then between traditional zoning concepts that you might be familiar with and more modern form-based codes are that we, instead of looking so much at the uses that are going on the property, we look at neighborhoods. We look more at community. Instead of trying to segregate land uses, we actually see some value in the diversity of those neighborhoods, particularly if you've got a neighborhood that's got residential and maybe some nightclub activity and a grocery store and a place to be able to work. Those would fit better into a form-based code if you're concerned about how people get around, and that's a big difference between the older style of traditional zoning and today's codes, where we are looking at transportation a lot more. We're looking at how people move around and how they spend their time throughout the day and throughout the week and even throughout the year, so that things are more efficient. And so we pay a lot more attention to the right of way, and particularly how the streetscape actually looks. And so if you're looking at updating your zoning codes, take a look at that, because you might want to consider not so much the conventional zoning, which really just talks about how big the building can be and what the setbacks are, to actually looking at some design guidelines, so that if you do have a large Walmart kind of superstore, you can require that they break up that exterior so that it looks a little more neighborhooded, makes more sense for your neighborhood, or even develop it as a neighborhood using the form-based codes and incorporate both commercial and residential uses in the same area with consistent landscaping regulations. Excuse me. So as you can probably see here, there's a direct link between planning and zoning. I started out talking about the comprehensive or the master development plan. Think of that as a guide in the same sort of way that you might think about, wanting to plant your garden so that you've got your green beans separated from your tomatoes, and you've got the corn someplace where they're not going to throw shade on the other plants. That's a guide. The zoning code then becomes the tools that you use to actually implement that guide. They'd start to define what this neighborhood looks like versus what that neighborhood looks like, and what uses are allowed, and which ones might be actually compatible. Think of it then as a tool, and neither of these need to be chiseled in stone. They need to be living documents that continually are updated with more input from your community on how things have been going and what they'd like to see changed. But this can be done very flexible. The plan itself is the guide to what you're doing, and think of the zoning code along with all of its enforcement tools as a way to get you there. Some of the other things that you talk about in a master plan and that address community development, especially through statutes, include annexation. This is something that's been litigated and discussed a lot in Wyoming and is coming up again. If not in this session, I've heard some rumblings coming up that it'll be coming up again soon. Basically, in the state statutes regarding annexation, the state recognizes that they've got authority and responsibility here that they can delegate to municipalities to protect the health, safety, and welfare of their citizens. You have authority to develop that property in ways that make sense to you, in logical ways that make sense to you. And so the statute has a very particular process that it lays out whenever someone wants to annex property into your community. It needs to meet those statutory requirements. And one of the first ones, for example, are that it be contiguous with your existing boundary. And you can get clever with that. I know in Douglas, we extended a contiguous area out to the new highway department building by essentially annexing a street that went all the way out there. And so you can gerrymander this to some extent, but to annex land, it's got to be adjacent to your property. It's got to make sense that it be annexed into your municipality, and that it makes sense logically, because that's how you protect them. There's a couple of different ways in Wyoming that annexation starts. You can start it yourself as a municipality. It can be initiated by a town or city council. It can also be initiated by a landowner or by a group of landowners. And they do that simply by coming to you and requesting that you consider this annexation process. At that point, the state statute says you need to prepare a report on the annexation, and that report will address potential concerns with regard to access and infrastructure for the annexation, with regard to what the future use of that might be, what the cost and who will bear the cost of extending infrastructure is going to be. It can be very, very detailed, and it should be. It should address everyone's concerns about whether or not that piece of property can and should be annexed into your municipality. Then, once you have all reached agreements on what that's going to look like and who's going to pay for those things, you can then develop a resolution of compliance. There's a statutory procedure similar to passing an ordinance here, where you work through a public hearing. You air those issues that came out during the annexation report, and this then leads to an actual ordinance that you will need to pass that brings that property formally into the town or the city, whatever your municipality is. I should actually, it comes up here after subdivisions. The other statute that I referred to at the beginning that you need to be aware of here is the one that has to do with subdivisions. Subdividing is really nothing more than taking a chunk of property, a lot, if you will, and subdividing it into a number of lots. Here in Wyoming, anytime you divide any parcel of land into 3 or more parcels, whether you sell them immediately or you're planning to do that in the future, that requires that it be subdivided. And if a subdivision is required and it happens either within your city limits or within a mile of it, then you're going to get a heads up about that through the county saying this is a proposed subdivision. You'll have an opportunity to take a look at that subdivision at that time and decide whether or not you as a municipality are going to support that. Anything that happens within your municipal limits needs to be recorded. There needs to be a subdivision plat. And so you probably are familiar that you have a multitude of subdivision plats that make up in their collectiveness your entire municipality. They all have to be described by lots and blocks. You can't have meets and bounds descriptions like that. You need to have everything within a municipality needs to be broken down into lots and blocks. And the subdivision platting process is how you actually go about doing that. I'll tell you again, there's a specific state statute that applies here, but basically it requires that this be planned and that within your subdivision, in addition to any lots and blocks that you want to create, you need to also be creating rights of way. And that's why communication is so important between the landowner and you guys at the municipality, because they need to know what are your development standards for roads, for sidewalks, for any kind of right-of-way. How do we connect with your bike path? All of those issues can be addressed through annexation. They can also be addressed here if you're already in the community through a subdivision. And so this process of creating the subdivision plat culminates when it gets recorded. And at that time, when the subdivision plat is accepted by the municipality and recorded, that's when the actual transfer or the dedication takes place of the rights of way into city or town ownership. And again, this is the other statute, the subdivision statute dictates how we go about making that process. You can't be forced to accept these subdivision plats if they don't match up with your master plan, if they don't match up with your zoning codes, if your expectations are not being met here, you have a lot of authority to say, no, we will not approve that. We will not accept that. And so the recording of it doesn't come with our authority, and without our authority, you can't do anything here. So be aware that this is an area that is covered by state statutes, just like annexation and zoning is. All right, with that, I'll take a short pause here and just ask if anyone has questions about community development before I shift gears and start looking at economic development.
Hey, Joe, a quick question from the chat from Brad. When you annex in a parcel and it has a water or sewer district on it, what happens to the existing infrastructure? Does that stay in control of the district or more into the hands of the municipality so they can serve and maintain the residents now being in the town?
I want to leave room because I don't know the full answer to that, but I will start by telling you it is negotiable as to how you take that in and whether or not as a municipality you have to accept their infrastructure or not. You don't have to. But once you have allowed that property to come into a municipality, you're going to have responsibility for it. How you address that responsibility, I think there may be some legal flexibility, whether you have an agreement with that special district or not, or whether or not there's an ongoing duty to pay. That'll have to be taken into consideration in the bigger picture of actually providing resources or services through that water or wastewater system, whatever it might be, because you've got to set rates as a municipality at a certain level to make sure that that will operate as a self-standing enterprise. And so if you're taking on somebody else's aging infrastructure, that may jack up an awful lot of people's water bill, and it may not be the best thing for the health and safety of your entire community to do that. On the flip side, if it's in good shape and you simply just need to maintain you may be able to easily take it in stride and maybe even reduce overall municipal water rates because the special district maybe was operating more efficiently. It might also have a lot to do, though, with the treatment facility and whether or not you can accept that into your overall ecosystem is likely to be a DEQ question, not just a matter of ownership and debt. And so I'm hedging my bet on the answer because it's really a complicated question. It's going to depend on environmental DEQ questions. It's going to depend on the negotiations with that special district, and it's going to depend on whatever the lawyers tell you can and can't do with water rates. Great question, though.
And this one's kind of playing out in real time right now. There's actually some legislative action on the water district, the Wardwell, I believe, is how to pronounce it. Water district, which was is there in service, is a service water district for Mills and Bar None. But there's actually some legislation about that absorption of that water district, and so that's one that's actually playing out in front of the legislature right now, and be interesting to follow.
Yeah, I could see it becoming very complicated, and I can also see the value in having the state involved directly in that discussion for that very reason, because there's a lot of players, a lot of agencies that are going to be impacted by that decision.
That's the only question I see in the chat, Joe.
Okay, let's move on. I want to talk to you about economic development. And again, this used to be a standalone presentation. I'm going to try to incorporate it into what I just talked about with community development. But here in Wyoming, most economic developers and most of the state agencies follow what we call the economic development building blocks in terms of understanding what exactly is Wyoming. And we've done this purposefully over the course of the last 20 years that I've been involved with economic development, because we know that this is essentially a small city with long streets, that we don't have the market size of other states, other communities, and that we need to be working together, working consistently. And so over the years, the Business Council, the Wyoming Business Council, and the Wyoming Economic Development Association have worked together to develop this presentation, this approach to economic development, so that we can coordinate on a local and a state level what it is we're doing. And a lot of people just didn't get this at first, because when they think of economic development, most people think about recruiting new businesses to their community. And while that is certainly a part of economic development, it's not a part that works very well in Wyoming. And in fact, you need to get all the other parts of economic development done correctly before you're going to get in a position where you can do any kind of real growth. And so it's just like a major, ongoing process. It it takes a lot to throw just a one-day event in Wyoming. And if you think of economic development being more than a single event, that it's an ongoing process that involves a lot of people, a lot of groups, then you're probably a lot closer to where you need to be to understand how and why economic development is necessary and why it works. These are the building blocks that we've developed over the years, and they start with the foundation of leadership and civic development and the role of public policy. You build onto that workforce development, infrastructure, and the thing that everybody is concerned about, quality of life. You can then, if you've got those in place, build on those and help businesses grow, whether they're existing businesses or whether you've got someone that's got a new startup idea. And only then, when you've gotten all of those pieces together, can you get to this new business recruitment that many people think of traditionally as being that's what economic development is all about. So I'm going to talk about each of those blocks a little bit here so that you get a better understanding of how those things work. I also want you to understand that while I've presented those in sort of a pyramid, build the foundation and then the rest will come approach, that's not really how it works. These actually go very much hand in hand. It takes tax revenues to build capacity. It takes tax revenues to be able to do economic development to attract more tax revenues. They really are tied together and cyclically are constantly working and interacting with one another throughout any kind of process, any kind of business development, any kind of growth. These things don't happen in isolation. They're not isolated pillars. These are each building blocks that all need to be in place, just like Legos all need to be in place in order to build any whole structure. So starting with leadership, the foundation of all of these building blocks really is you guys as leaders and understanding that with economic development, you're focused on creating or attracting jobs. Maybe your focus, if you're Gillette right now, is going to be in retaining families there and retaining jobs in your community. You need to understand that with jobs come tax base, commercial and industrial tax base. And with jobs comes income. And that income then gets flipped in your community in terms of sales, whether it is groceries or gases or what. We spend a lot of money in our communities. Not all of it is taxed. We no longer tax groceries, and that's something that I know Justin and others are having to address again in the legislature. But those things that are taxed literally become the revenues, the lifeblood of your municipality. There's a direct connection. And without growth of those tax revenues, your community is going to stagnate. With inflationary factors, you're going to struggle to keep people in place as employees for your community. People aren't going to want to stay there. They want to live in a community that is vibrant. We need communities to be, if not youth-led, at least youth-appreciated. As a civic leader, as someone who's maybe elected as well, you need to understand that your youth are looking for communities that are vibrant. They don't want sleepy old towns that are, dying. They want to see growth. And so the decisions that you make as a leader are key. The ordinances that you pass, that role that public policy plays, how much regulation is just right so that you can control your growth and get your community to grow in a direction that you want it to grow without being too much. If you stifle business development, if you stifle the imagination of our youth, they're going to leave. And so it's important that we all understand this is a process that takes a lot of different people working together to support, but it really does begin with you guys as your community leaders. You need to help define how much are we going to grow and what directions and what will that start to look like. The fact is, without leadership, nothing else gets done. It really does boil down to people. And at the local government level, at the municipal level. You are the folks that are actually out there getting things done. And so we need to make sure that of everyone that we talk to, you guys really do get it. You understand that jobs and tax base are important to your community. The next building block that I want to address is that sense of community, working where you want to live, that really boils down to quality of life. And I'll tell you that when we talk about quality of life, every single community that I have ever visited has insisted that they had one of the best qualities of life on the planet. We can't all have that best quality of life. I think if we were to narrow it down, though, what we can start to identify is what makes your community special, what makes it unique, what gives it the qualities that make it it. And so we think it's important when we talk about economic development that things like historic preservation or cultural appreciation or things that our young people want to be able to do, they want to be able to go on a walking path or a biking path. Let's provide those things. They want art downtown. They want more trees in our downtown areas. Let's be talking about how we can provide those kinds of things. From a community development and economic development perspective, those things go hand in hand. Likewise, in order to have any kind of job, you've got to have a workforce. One of the limiting factors here in Wyoming is that we've got not just a small commercial market, but we've got a small number of workers. Of the 500,000 or 600 million people that live here in Wyoming, fewer than half of them are working. And if you are an employer, especially in a specialized industry like data centers or coding, software development, those things require a large workforce. And not just, the people that you hire and you're good with forever, but rather they recognize that your workforce needs to continually be updating. They know that they're going to have some revolving door issues. They're going to have turnover, so they want to make sure that there's going to be workers that are coming up that are young, that are eager to learn more, and that are well educated on the basics. And so making sure that our workforce is well cared for is critical. And one of the things that we've seen over the last couple of decades is the state invest a lot more in our community colleges and in technical skills and in realigning what our university is teaching so that we are preparing the right work skills. I'll circle back to the university because they've also been adding a lot of other kinds of skill areas that help with economic development, but this is one that's important. Infrastructure development is also, in my opinion, one of the foundational building blocks. When I talk about infrastructure, I am talking about roads and water and sewer, but also making sure that we've got property that is truly shovel ready from an economic development perspective. It's important that when we say we've got a business park, that we know what it can and can't do. And to have a business park that's truly shovel ready, that means that the business or industry that wants to locate there just needs to go pull a building permit. You've already got natural gas in place. You've already got fiber optics in place. You've already got all of the private utilities and the public utilities in place. You already have a road that's platted, if not already paved, with the roads, water, sewer, sidewalk in place already. In fact, the Business Council has developed a shovel-ready certification program because developers have been asking for it. They want to know, what do you mean when you say you've got property that's shovel ready? And so this is something that is very unique, community to community, as far as whether you've got a business park or whether you've just got some infill lots that you want to fill. You need to know what those are and what infrastructure is already available to them, or if not available, how quickly you can get something to it. That is not just shovel ready, but where you stand with your electricity, with all of those things. You don't have to guess about it. And if you are short, you know exactly how much you're short and how much it'll cost to bring over more power from the closest substation. So you're thinking about development, not just getting things ready, but you know what else is going to be necessary as groups expand and move into your business park. The next building block I think is hands down the most important thing local economic developers can do, and that is to help existing businesses grow. The hardest thing for economic developers to do is to get people to move here, to get people to start a new business, to take a risk in a market that they don't know, with a workforce that they don't know, is mission impossible for most of us. And so think about this for just a moment. If you're trying to develop growth, let's start with the facts. Depending on which community you are in, between 50 and 80% of new growth in your community is going to come from businesses that are already there. That's at least half. They're worth the investment. They're worth getting to know. And they're already there. The hardest part of the game is over. All you need to do is to help them to identify a new product or a new service, or help them push their products and services with better marketing, or maybe even look to acquire somebody that's in their supply stream, or maybe above them in the production stream. We can definitely do our most good by helping businesses that are already here grow. That builds goodwill. It helps to strengthen our relationship with the key stakeholders, and that is taxpayers. And by helping them grow, we've minimized the risk of losing our time or money in helping them, because they're already here. They're more likely to succeed. And if they're an existing business and they've already weeded out some of the craziness that they once had as an entrepreneur, and if they've already established themselves as someone that can employ people and pay taxes, make that your priority. Existing businesses should be every economic developer's priority. Help the people that are already here grow. Help them hire a new employee. No, it's not as maybe sexy as getting a front page news story about moving the new Budweiser plant here, but that's not realistic anyway. Stick with what's realistic and work with the people that are already in your community. Help them succeed. I really honestly believe that's the single biggest thing that you can do. Help your existing businesses grow. Same By the same token, help your folks that are local become entrepreneurs. Some of the best ideas that I've ever seen came from people that weren't necessarily in that particular industry, but they had the opportunity to observe it being done around them. And they come about things with a pull yourself up by your own bootstraps mentality that is oftentimes genius. I've seen real genius at play in Wyoming. And if you've got a local inventor, or someone that wants to try a new business, or needs a leg up, maybe they can't pull themselves up by their own bootstraps. Maybe you need to do an entrepreneurship challenge and dangle some real money in front of them to take the risk of this new business. Do it. In the same way that helping existing businesses grow is a great strategy, you also want to spend that kind of time and energy with your existing residents. Start with the youth. Develop an entrepreneurship camp. Find a way to be working directly with the people that are in your community, that you send a strong message. This is a community that's not only open for business, but they're working with people that are already there to create new business. So innovation and entrepreneurship is a very important piece of this. So many of Wyoming's biggest companies, and so much of our legacy is defined by companies that are homegrown. So invest your time there. And if you want to take venture capital kind of risks and start with startups, start with at least the people that already have a vested interest in your community. And oftentimes it's the youth in your community, or maybe existing businessmen that want to start a whole new spin-off kind of homegrown company. Pay attention to those efforts. Those are worth supporting. And then finally, if you can get all of those other things done right, then and only then are you probably in a position where you can do new business recruitment. And I'll be honest with you, a big chunk of the new business recruitment that's been happening in Wyoming has been happening in Cheyenne, largely as a matter of um, spillover from the Front Range area. It takes a lot of hard work and a big community to be able to recruit any new business or industry. And yeah, we are seeing some successes, especially in targeted industries like data centers and gun manufacturers, because right now Wyoming's got some key advantages over other states in those particular industries. And so if that's a direction that your community is going, that's a game that's very lively right now, and it's one that you should be aware of, because the Business Council is actively recruiting folks that can help you in those areas, and there are others as well. So this is a building block that I think is best accomplished by working directly with the Wyoming Business Council. They coordinate and attend many of the trade shows where contacts can be made and leads generated. They can help with some follow-up and with structure of what your presentation is. They also have funds that can help your community grow by building new facilities or maybe enhancing existing facilities. And so this particular building block of business recruitment, I think, should be done always hand in hand with the Wyoming Business Council. I mentioned earlier the university along with the Business Council, and those are two of the agencies that are involved with economic development on a statewide basis. But there are several others. At the university, for example, the Wyoming Technology Business Center, SBDC, Manufacturing Works are all organizations that have been based there. Their Research Products Center, the Women's Business Center are two others. In addition, the Wyoming State Chamber of Commerce and your local chambers make great partners. The Wyoming Department of Workforce Services also has a number of programs, especially designed to help train new skills or new employees for existing businesses. There's a lot of tools out there that you can access, and they're available to you as a municipality. If you've got a local economic development group, there's an even better fit working directly with them and with your regional director from the Business Council. And so understand that there are others out there that are playing in this field, and they're available and able to help your community grow. So please reach out to them. You don't have to do anything alone. Again, in the same way that economic development is not a simple one-day event, it's a process. I want you to think of it as a process that's done, at least in Wyoming, collaboratively. You got a lot of people that can and will help you get this done. And so be encouraged that you don't have to figure it all out on your own. There are good folks at WIDA that can help. If you don't have a local economic developer, I would strongly encourage you to reach out to the regional business council person that can help you grow your community. A couple more quick things that I want to just add. There's a couple of statewide plans out there that you need to be aware of. One that had been discussed over the last couple of years under our current governor's guidance is called Endow, and Economically Needed Diversity Options for Wyoming. That is a 20-year economic diversification plan. There are some great ideas in it. You can get a copy of that online on the governor's website or on the Business Council's website. It builds with the building blocks that I've just talked about and starts to look at some next-gen industrial development kinds of things. Along with that, we've also got business opportunity zones that are a federal development that blends in really nicely with Endow. And then finally, I want you to be aware that there's also a statewide economic development strategic plan, and it too builds on those building blocks that I just covered. In fact, it's a very unique and useful plan. You can see the entire plan right here. It's in one page. The Business Council developed this in a way to just give you a snapshot of what it is that they're trying to do, and I think this summarizes it well. And so this plan in particular is one that I would pay attention to as I developed my local economic development plan, because I'd want it to be consistent here. Okay, that is a very quick overview of community and economic development. I would ask if there are any questions about this, and I'm looking to see if there are any on the chat. I don't see anything there. Justin, do you have anything?
I don't have any questions in the chat at all. Anybody, if you'd like to pick Joe's brain at all on this particular subject, feel free to unmute and ask away before we transition to the Business Council presentation.
Hey, Joe, this is Julia Stubel and Lander. This is really helpful information. Thank you. I wonder if you have any advice or best practices. You know, you mentioned all the different entities that could be working on community development, you know, our council, a chamber, we have an economic development association here that does great work. What's your advice for like assembling all the players and helping us move in like a cohesive direction, right? Pulling for the same kind of team instead of going in off their different projects. Is that our role? What do you think?
Yeah, excellent question, Julia. And I think a lot of communities have been asking that in a couple of different ways. First, there are communities like Laramie and Douglas that specifically looked at ways to combine their chamber and their local economic development group into one. They thought it would be more efficient. They foresaw that there would be fewer donations to those organizations and thought it would be better to coordinate them under one roof. And so as sort of a consolidation effort, we have seen that happen. We've also seen through the Wyoming Rural Development Council, they had a process where they worked through community assessments, and from that developed, again, an ad hoc basis across the state, a number of groups actually get together on purpose and maybe hold quarterly meetings to talk about just development issues. I know that in Carbon County, there's a group that talks about development issues quarterly. In Converse County, we had one there where we had all of the groups that you just mentioned getting together on a quarterly basis just so that we'd be touching base. And then when we did identify a joint project, we would try to make sure that our plans not just included everybody in the input, but everybody had a role to play in getting it done. And for example, that's part of the process, part of the thinking that went into getting new libraries and a new community college built. And so it's very important to be working together. Those groups are a natural fit to be working together. As a municipality, I would do everything in my power to require them to be talking to one another. Your main streets, your chambers, your economic development groups. If you've got representatives coming in from the Business Council and from other organizations, make sure they have each other's contact information and encourage them to be working together on those projects. Frankly, no really good projects have been done by lone rangers. You need all of those groups working together to get big projects done, and big projects move the needle. So hopefully that answers your question some, Julia.
No, that's good. That's good food for thought. It did spark a follow-up, if I could ask. I've never heard of the Wyoming Rural Development Council, and I just did a Google when you said it. Not much came up. Can you tell us about that?
Yes, I'm an old timer. Look at the Wyoming Business Council. It was absorbed into the Business Council. I think it still does exist, at least as a board, but they were Main Street players. They developed this community assessment process a couple of decades ago. And I worked on a number of them with them. I'm certain somebody from the Business Council is on the phone today that could give you an update on where the Rural Development Council stands now.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Joe?
Yeah, go ahead.
This is Eric Scott and Matitzi. I was thinking one of our major source of funding, I guess, is tourism. We've got the Park County Travel Council. How do they work with statewide councils? Is there like a Wyoming Office of Travel or a Wyoming something or other?
There is a state tourism office, and they can certainly help you with planning and with data. They do a great job assessing the economic impact of tourism on a county basis, and they would certainly be helpful there. Many of your visitor councils and travel bureaus are funded with a lodging tax. And the use of lodging tax dollars is controlled by state statute. And in a nutshell, they can use it for marketing and not much else. And so those funds are available to use. I've worked with the groups that controlled those funds. For example, worked with the State Fair and the Converse County Tourism Promotion Board to get funding to promote events, and supported that because their chamber was pushing for it. And we've also used those funds to be able to do grand opening marketings of tourism-related businesses. So yeah, good. There's both a state and a local group. I don't know who does the Park County stuff. I know that James Klessens is the Forward Cody person. He could put you in touch with them if you don't know who that is.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
Yeah.
Any other questions for Joe? Seeing none, appreciate it, Joe. Thank you so much for your presentation again today, and we will look forward to seeing you again next Friday. With that, I'm going to go ahead and transition over. We've got a couple of guests from the Wyoming Business Council. As Joe mentioned, and it's a perfect segue into the Business Council and introducing them to you folks as well. We've got Kim Porter, who's the Rural Development Manager for the Wyoming Business Council, and she's joined by Elena Zempel. She's one of the regional directors from Teton, Sublette, and Fremont counties. Those regional directors cover, just depending on the geographic footprint, but those are sort of your first contact points or main points of contact with the Business Council in most instances. So with that, I'll go ahead and introduce Kim Porter and let her take it away.
Very cool. And I'm just sending something to Elena because she doesn't have the login information because she had to go to Salt Lake City. So I'm sorry, I'm doing something super crazy really quick here. All righty, I'm going to share my screen. You try to have everything together and you don't. So anyways, yeah, thanks for having me here. What we're going to do today is talk about the Wyoming Business Council. We are the state's economic development agency, and we consider our customers to be not only businesses, but communities. So a big part of what we do is working with communities, and we have a great partnership with WAM, and that's super cool for us. So we've been in existence since 1988. There has been, kind of a lot of changes going on over the years. And so one of the biggest things now is, notwithstanding that COVID changed a bunch of things, but the oil and gas industry has really changed our economy. And so now we have to rise to that challenge because we need to really, we've always needed to work on economic diversification, but now it's super important. So as Joe mentioned, we do have a statewide strategic plan, and we like to really think of this as the statewide strategic plan. This isn't our strategic plan, it's statewide. And so we want to add value to our core industries. We recognize our natural resources, our tourism, our outdoor recreation and agriculture. So what we want to do is we want to add value to them. How do we build these economies through innovation, startup companies, recruiting companies to come in, technology, transformation. So really we want to build on the industries that built Wyoming. But on the other hand, we also need to think about the new economic sectors. So there are some things that we don't have in Wyoming that we can start looking at. And you guys can read this, but you kind of look at the healthcare industry, the financial industries, digital and technology. And one of the things that's kind of cool about the world today is, we can live in a great state like Wyoming, because of our broadband infrastructure and everything. And like Joe mentioned, arts and culture are super important to people because people, they want to live in a cool community. They don't want to live just anywhere. And so we have those options for sure. And the way we do this, so we're adding value to the industries we have, we're activating new sectors, but we're also leveraging everything we have. So we're leveraging our economic development, just the connectedness of Wyoming. We all work together. We have to, partnerships don't have a lot of people. So in the partnerships, we're working with different agencies, communication. We're also really looking, especially at the downturn of the economy, we're looking at our programs to make sure that we're really working for Wyoming. And then we have a great staff of expertise, and we rely on our partners, WAM, WEDA, the Wyoming Economic Development Association, the university, tons of partners, got to work together. And then at the bottom, it kind of talks about who we serve. And you'll see that communities is one of those. So you guys are one of our biggest customers that we have. So what we're going to do today is we're just going to give you an introduction to the Business Council, kind of go through some of the programs that we have. And we want to go ahead and talk about all of the programs we have. And I'm going to turn this over to Elena because really our regional directors are our boots on the ground. They know about every program we have, whereas some of us in Cheyenne are a little bit more specialized. But when Elena's done giving you guys just an overview of the Business Council and what we do, I'm going to talk a little bit more about our rural development programs, because really the rural development programs are the ones that are designed for you guys, for the communities. So Elena, are you on here, dude? Okay, she is not on here, so I'm going to go ahead and take over. So one of the things that we do have is we do have regional directors on the ground. We have 6 regions, and the people that are out there that are on the ground, those are the people that you need to contact first, and you need to say, hey, this is what we need. and these guys will be able to help you. So, we've got Amy over up in Bighorn, Hot Springs Park in Washakie County. Kim kind of in the middle of the state. Brandy hits that north corner. Elena, who hopefully will get on here in a second.
Who is on now?
Oh, I'm turning this over to Elena.
I am on. However, I had to unmute myself. My apologies to everyone. But Kim was doing a great job. I probably should have left her do that. The Wyoming Business Council was organized in 1998, and interesting, when it was funded, it was defunded some 2 years later, and then refunded again 4 months after that. One of the distinctives about the Business Council is its regional directors. It has the state divided into 6 regions, which there's the Northwest region, which is Amy Quick, the Northeast, which is Brandy Harlow, the Southeast, Heather Tupper, the Central is Kim Reitmer, and the Southwest is myself. And at this particular point, we are hiring another regional that will be covering Uinta, Lincoln, and Sweetwater counties, while I take on Teton, Sublette, and Fremont counties. That new regional should be hired within the next couple of weeks. The Business Council we have on our phones will say that we are Wyoming's Economic Development Agency. And in that role, one of our most well-known programs is the BRC, the Business Ready Community. It is a grant and loan program set up for cities, towns, counties, and the tribes. Because of the Wyoming Constitution, we can't distribute funds directly to a private enterprise without specific legislative directives. So what we do within the BRC is we grant and or loan money to local governments, and they put in the infrastructure and then negotiate lease terms with the business that is, or with potential businesses that are coming into the state for public benefit. And we've most often translated that public benefit as jobs created at the county mean or median level. So we've done a number of projects throughout the state. We have, within the BRC, we have 3 levels. We have business, committed business, and we called it committed business because there is a committed business, which is kind of clever. And in that, that business is named, and the lease back of the infrastructure that was built, whether it's a building or whatever, is then repaid through a revenue recapture. That revenue recapture, 75% of that stays with the local community, and 25% is returned to the Business Council to be redistributed under the application procedure. Second one is community readiness. This is was initially set up for industrial parks, but we've used it in a lot of other places for primarily infrastructure like water and sewer and fiber, to get a community ready to be able to recruit businesses. The third one is community enhancement. This one has, this one is only at the $500,000 level and requires a 25% match. And it is done to enhance a community for their workforce. The other 2 have the business committed and community readiness are up to $3 million, $3 million grant, $3 million loan. The Business Council also does a lot of other things. That's probably the BRC is what we're most known for, because there's actual check written. But we also do business where we go and we do trade shows and we do business recruitment. When the business council is contacted by a company that's looking to locate or relocate in the state of Wyoming, we send out leads to communities and they respond to what the business wants, whether it needs to be by a natural gas line or if it needs a railroad or if it needs a shovel-ready place to put their business. We have that department within this. We also have our loan department, and we do loans that are bank participatory, and those can go straight to businesses because there's a repayment schedule, and so it's based on that, their repayment ability and the ability to collateralize rather than public benefit. Our challenge loan department is headed up by Josh Keefe, and we also have the large loan program within that, and that's for much, much larger projects. The one thing to keep in mind with all of our loans, they are bank participatory, which means that a bank has to be involved, and the actual application is the bank's responsibility and not the businesses. That helps some of the smaller banks, especially, that have to have loan to value ratios at a certain level. When we come in, we actually come in with money. We are not a guaranteed program. We actually come in with money that allows them to meet their criteria for their bank. We used to have a Made in Wyoming program that has been transferred to another agency. And so I would say look for that to come out here soon for shoppers, but people who are producing products that will be highlighted on a website. And we are working with the SBDC, the Small Business Development Center, to help them get people to advertise their products on that website. We also do have partner agencies. When speaking of SBDC or Small Business Development, we help fund some of those programs. You'll know, like Manufacturing Works, Wyoming Women's Business Center, we used to fund. They are on their standalone now. The thing that the Wyoming Women's Business Center had was a revolving loan fund for higher risk businesses for debt financing that were not something that could be bank financed. We do, which will be highlighted by Kim, rural development and its programs, including placemaking, which is very, very helpful, especially, I think, for our smaller communities. And here's what happens. I'll remember all of this and then want to come back in 10 minutes and tell you about the 3 things I forgot to mention. So with that, I will close, not to spend too much time. Thank you.
Cool, Elena, thank you. So the Business Council did just reorganize ourselves, and we reorganized to better serve our customers, which is you guys. And so we have our WBC services, and then we also have our investment. And Elena went over most of the investment stuff, which is super cool because we are known mostly for our grants and loans. But just to talk about our services, one of the reasons why we put this together is because this is the technical assistance team for the Business Council. And so I'm going to just highlight everything just super quickly. So we do recruitment. They do have a Team Wyoming, to where we work mostly with local economic development agencies to work on this recruitment. This is one thing I don't know a lot about, but if you have questions, you can sure call Wendy Lopez. We do have an agribusiness person. She helps Wyoming agriculture. What she's trying to do is help them market their products domestically and internationally. So she's working to gear people up to be selling outside of the state. We do have our entrepreneurship. This is something that is super important because there's a lot of people in Wyoming that have a lot of really good ideas. And sometimes it's hard to take that idea from the idea and put it into a business and everything. So we do have a program that helps entrepreneurs. We have some startup challenges. We have some different opportunities that people can build their entrepreneurship. And that is Bert. We also do have a broadband coordinator, and basically his job is to herd cats. He's really trying to really trying to decide what the different areas in the state need and kind of combine them together and then match them up with resources. And so there is a broadband plan. We're looking at the broadband plan again, just to see if it fits in everything. But basically, he just wants to make sure that everybody gets what they need out of broadband. And this is super important. And we're finding it's always been important, but through this COVID, we're kind of finding out that broadband is even more important. So that's Ryan. We do have the Main Street program, which is a community development and it's an economic development program. So Main Street America 30 years ago formed, and they have 4 pillars that they work under, and they're proven pillars. And so what's cool about this is this helps build up your commercial core in your downtown. There's some things that go along with this, some reporting that has to happen, some standards that have to happen. And so our Main Street program works with the National Main Street or Main Street America to make sure our downtowns in Wyoming are working good. This is a program that you do have to apply to, but when I get into the rural development part of it, we'll talk about how we can help some of the smaller communities build up into the Main Street program, which, like I said, has some reporting requirements. It's a pretty unique and prestigious thing to be a Main Street community. So, and then we do have our rural development. So the thing about rural development is just to help communities build their capacity. Because the one thing that we do recognize in the business council, especially your clerks are, your clerks do everything. They kind of run the town, they're the grant person, they're the economic development person, they're the tourism person, they're the Main Street person. And so we realize that they wear a lot of hats. And so we've tried to make some of our programs so that we can help smaller communities with maybe not a lot of capacity still be successful. So we're going to dig deeper into those in just a minute. Elena already talked about our investments, so I'm not going to go into those very much, but we do have a very knowledgeable staff who can help you with financing tools, grants, and loans. And the best thing is if you have a project that you want to do in your community, is just call your regional director, because they know about all the financing options that are available. Not just the Wyoming Business Council options, but there's federal options too that are available for some of your projects. So I'm going to kind of skip over those because she did a really good job. So on the rural development side, is one of the things that we're trying to do is develop a comprehensive set of tools that help you guys in the community overcome the economic and community development challenges. We are right now kind of defining rural development as under 10,000 people, but holy cow, this could be debated all day. So we're not going to turn anybody away for sure. But the thing when we're doing rural development is we're trying to develop tools that if you're at this level, if you're at level 1 and you just are getting started, you can just do these tools. If you're a little bit more sophisticated, you've already done some of level 1, you can go up to level 2. And then if you really need some more expertise, then we're willing to help you. So in this way, we're trying to meet the unique needs of each community. And the one thing we also try to do is to be very flexible and really look at our programs. So the very first thing is it does all start with planning. If you don't know where you're going, how are you going to get there? And Joe talked about the community assessment program, and that was a very successful program for 20 years. And so now we're calling those community reviews. And so what we did is we looked at all the community reviews, what worked, what didn't work. And so we kept all the things that were great for the community assessments. And then we added in some of the stuff that we weren't so good at. So community review is basically a 2 or 3 day session where we come into the community and we ask the community what they want for their future. So it's very public engagement oriented. At the end, you get a town hall meeting that tells you what we heard. And then you also get a report that gets you started. And one of the things about the community assessments is it used to be like this 100-page awesome report of just tons and tons of information, but it overwhelmed people. And so, or communities. So now the report is a little bit smaller and says, hey, here's some stuff that you can get going on. We also have found that some communities have done a lot of planning. And so they have 4 or 5 plans and they're like, we haven't done anything with these plans. So we do a plan review. We combine everything. We see what's the same in all of them. And then we help you guys mobilize, because sometimes you get a bunch of plans and the same thing comes up over and over again that the community wants, but you just need a plan to be moving forward. So we do some action planning. We do a process called strategic doing, which I think is super cool, because a lot of times when you have an idea, say you need a meeting space in your community, you automatically go to, we need a community center. Well, then you realize, oh, wait, we don't have the money, we don't have the staff, all the different things. What strategic doing does is it takes the assets that are in the room and builds your project from the ground up. And it's also a very good process for loose networks. So when you really need to play in the sandbox together, but nobody's the boss. And so it's a cool way of getting things done, that you're starting with what you have and building what you need, instead of saying, hey, we want this and we can't get that. We do some custom planning. And one of the things is we're really rethinking our whole planning process right now. So there's a couple communities who want to do community development plans. And so we're looking at that and we're seeing how can we meet those needs for those communities that can't afford to do a community development plan. There's parts of the community development plans that we just don't have the expertise to do. And so anyways, we're looking at this and hopefully we'll come up with some good ideas to help you guys out so that you can afford to do the planning tools that you need. And we also do asset mapping. Asset mapping is super cool because every community in Wyoming is unique and they have things that they can build on. And so if you know what you have, then you can build on it. And it's easier to recruit companies to come in. It's easier to say, hey, this is who we are and this is who we want to be here. So that asset mapping just helps you identify the things that you have that are unique to you, so that you can build on that for your community and for recruitment. And then ripple effect mapping is kind of super cool. Sometimes you have a project and so I'm going to use the community center again. So you get a community center, you build it and you're like, oh, wow, we got a community center, but you don't realize the unintended outcomes of it. So maybe because you did a community center, you were able to have a senior lunch. And because you were able to have a senior lunch, people were able to stay in their homes more because they could come have good nutrition. And because you had your community center, maybe your 4-H kids had a place to meet. And because they had a place to meet, one kid was able to get a scholarship. And because he was able to get a scholarship. And so I think you guys are getting the idea that sometimes there's unintended outcomes that are super cool on some of your projects. So it's another way to help get that ROI, because sometimes in community development, ROI is a little bit hard to do. I already talked about strategic doing. I guess the only thing I should say about this is one thing about strategic doing, and we follow this in our rural development plan, is when you do strategic planning, you think, and then you start doing. And so you do, I don't know, 6 months of planning, and then you realize that maybe you missed the boat. And so that's kind of a bummer. But on strategic doing, every 30 days, you're looking at it. Hey, does this work? Does this not work? What do we need to do to make this work? And again, and like I said, it's really developed for loose networks where nobody's the boss. And you're constantly looking at things so you don't get too far down the road and realize that you're not in a good place. One of the things that we did, so Main Street it's really an awesome plan. It has 4 pillars that just are proven, 35 years of data that proves that Main Street works. But the one thing that we realized is there are some communities that just don't have the capacity to do all the stringent requirements of Main Street. And before you guys get too down and depressed, there was a community back east that had 250 people, and they were a Main Street America community. They won that prestigious award that a lot of communities are looking for. And we do have a couple of communities in Wyoming who won that award. Rollins, Rock Springs. Oh, I'm probably missing somebody. Anyways, the Main Street Light program really tells the story of what we're trying to do. So you have your start small. Start small is just a document that has 52 ideas of what you can do in your downtown. So there's no money, there's no technical assistance. It's just said, hey, try these out, see if they work. Pretty cool ideas. Once you start doing some of those ideas, then you can move to placemaking. And placemaking is a funny thing because it's a standalone program on itself, but we've also built placemaking into the Main Street Light program. And the reason why we do it is placemaking and Main Street really go hand in hand. But one of the things about placemaking is it's community involvement. And so placemaking helps you get community members together to start working together. And it's lighter, quicker, cheaper. You're trying something out, it works. So it builds a little bit more capacity. And then we have Wyoming downtowns. And in Wyoming downtowns, so let me go back. So in placemaking, you have technical assistance, there's training, and there's some grant dollars available. So a little bit more help. And then when you get into Wyoming downtowns, there's a little bit more technical assistance and a little bit more help monetarily wise. So you get some Main Street training that really talks to you about, hey, this is what Main Street is. We do some SWOT analysis for you at that point in time, some volunteer training. So Wyoming Downtowns has a really easy application. And all we want to see is, hey, we are committed. You guys as elected officials, that's what we want to see, that the elected officials in the town are committed to helping the downtown. So the Main Street Light program is really just a way to help communities take advantage of the Main Street program that can't quite meet the requirements. So it's super fun. You can go out our website and look at it. Placemaking is one of the things that I think is, it's a great program because placemaking takes what you have in your community and it builds on it. So instead of build it and they will come, it's, hey, what would you like to see in this area? So it looks at your assets and it takes your underutilized spaces and makes those into spaces that people really want to be in. And the thing that's cool about placemaking is it's lighter, quicker, cheaper. So it isn't writing a grant to put some infrastructure in somewhere. It's like, hey, let's throw a couple of chairs and an umbrella out on the sidewalk, see if people use it. And then if they use it, then maybe we'll start, building into some of the grants that we need. It's very heavy on the public engagement. Our placemaking program right now in Wyoming, it's a 4-hour training, and then you can apply for the grants. But what's cool about the training is when you're done, you have a public engagement plan. You have your power of 10 done, which the power of 10 looks at your whole community. You don't just look at one place, you look at your whole community. And you also have projects in place that you can start working on. So we've had some really good luck with placemaking. One of the things that I want to show you on this picture here is I really wish that I could see everybody, but how many of your towns have a weedy lot? I mean, look at the picture on the left. I think every town in Wyoming has a weedy lot like that. And so what Rock Springs did is they applied for a placemaking grant. They had a lot of partners, some of their energy companies, and they took this weedy, unused lot and turned it into a putt-putt golf course. And so that's one of the things we're trying to do. We're trying to take these places in our communities that aren't used or are underused and turn them into a place that people want to be in. And the whole theory behind placemaking is if people spend more time in your community, then they're going to spend more money. They come in, they play putt-putt golf. Maybe they're going to have lunch or have an ice cream or something. So they're going to spend time in your community and they're going to spend money in your community. So it's super fun. If you watch in the next couple of days, I just sent over our 2020 placemaking stats. And it's super cool because everybody knows that COVID shut everything down, but placemaking was still going on. And one of the things about placemaking is Rock Springs did a pet parade, so it didn't cost them anything, but yet it brought joy to people. Doing chalk art, even in your neighborhoods or in your business district, it makes people smile. So it can be simple stuff like that. All right, so placemaking. So we do have some grants in the rural development. We have placemaking grants. This year we have 2 rounds. Our open summer grants are $2,500. Our holiday grants are going to be pretty substantial. We're going to have 2 for $10,000, 2 for $5,000, 5 for $2,500, and then 10 for $1,000. And one of the reasons why we're doing this holiday grants or the winter grants is when we were doing the training, everybody's like, oh my God, it's so ugly in Wyoming right now because it's winter. Well, what we want to do is encourage people to be outside in the wintertime. So there will be some things that people need to incorporate. They need to block the wind, capture the sunlight, add some lighting, add some seating, and make it so people want to be outside in the wintertime. So 2 grant rounds in 2021. We do have leadership grants. This can be county leadership programs, but basically one of the things that we mainly fund in this is Future Business Leaders of America, Future Farmers of America, FCCLA, all those kind of career to technical education, ag in the classroom. And so a lot of the times in this one, we fund youth leadership, knowing that that's our future, but we do consider county and statewide leadership programs. And then we do have community development grants. These are up to $2,500. And really, the whole object of this is just to make your community a better place to live or to encourage people to stay. And so this is an example of a community that has a Stampede Street, and they put some different historical signs along the way with the hopes that it'll get people to stop and stay in their community. So this could have rolled over to placemaking for sure, but hoping to get people to stay. There's another community who they did a sound system at their fairgrounds, and that was important to them because they bring in a lot of different events that are paid for in their community. In this one, we funded some maps, some of the tear off maps that tell people what they can visit in. So really, this is just a micro grant, not a lot of money, to help communities with what they need for sure. And then Elena put this together. So not only do we have Wyoming Business Council grants, but there are a lot of other funding sources that are available for you. So AARP, Kaboom is great for playgrounds. The Arts Council, please, they've got a couple grants at the Arts Council that are super cool. So there are different funding options besides the Wyoming Business Council. So with that, we're open to any questions you guys might have.
Kim, that was super helpful also. Lots of good information there. I don't have a question about what you presented, but I'm more curious if you could talk about the opportunities for us with the federal, the USDA's Rural Development Program, and what does that offer to Wyoming towns? How do we access any of those resources?
That's super cool, and Elena probably could answer that better if she's on here, but USDA Rural Development has some great programs. Are you still on, Elena?
Yeah, I am. The thing I will tell you about USDA, and it's the same as EDA and SBA, you're going to have that local government involvement, and then therefore a public process with that. But those are larger, tend to be larger financial commitments than what what Kim just, nice job, Kim, went through in the smaller, more manageable things to get done in a shorter period of time. There's a process and an application with those.
Okay, good.
And
How about comparison? Thanks.
And with the USDA Rural Development, they do have a grant application open right now. I'd encourage you guys, we can send you the information. I'd encourage you to go out and look. The application is due the end of March, and it's kind of community and economic development.
They also,
are we still there?
They also offer a lot too, Julia. You know, some of our other communities around the state, I know like Ten Sleep ended up getting a fairly substantial USDA, I believe it was a loan for their sewer system. So some of, you know, obviously a lot of it's economic development and those kinds of things, but it can also be, you know, more of the brick and mortar infrastructure type things as well. So they've got a lot of programs. We have brought people in from the USDA in the past to WAM events to talk about their, you know, to talk about their programs and introduce those things, and we'll look to do so in the future as well. So stay tuned for that.
Okay, awesome. Thanks. And thanks, Kim and Elena, for all the great info for what the Business Council can do for us too.
Super cool. Any other questions? The one thing I would say, since there's no other questions, is I would just encourage you to know who your regional director is. And if you have questions, if you guys are like me, like tonight, you're going to think of a gazillion questions. You're like, oh, what's this? Call your regional director, because they know, they have to be familiar with all of our programs and other programs, and they're your first kind of line of defense. If you have an idea, you can kind of run it past them, and you know, they'll help you kind of give it the straight face test. So definitely call your regional director if you have any questions.
All right. I don't see any questions in the chat. Did anybody else have any other questions before we look to wrap up? All right. Well, thank everyone again. Thank you, Elena and Kim, for joining us this afternoon. Great information, and hopefully the folks not only on today, but the folks that review the video playback that weren't able to participate live will be able to get a lot of information out of that and reach out to you guys and hopefully use the business council's programs so their community's best advantage. So thank you again for that, for your time and the information.
Well, thanks for having us.
Bet, of course. Everybody else, thank you so much again for being here. We'll look forward to next week, of course, is the final week. Joe will be on again to begin the session, and then Dustin Blythe from Wildfile will join us to talk about media relations. It'll be an interesting conversation with him as well. So we look forward to seeing everybody next Friday. I will have the PowerPoint presentations up as well as the video recording. It's all sent out on Monday. So thanks again, everybody. Have a great weekend, and we'll see you next week.
Thank you.